Did Nolan Wells' family not turn over his cell phone to the police? The lawyer for one of Nolan's friends just made that accusation on Dan Abrams' Sirius show, and we're going to bring on Dan to give his take on that and the latest on this case. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber.
First, an 18-year-old college football player vanishes during a boating trip to a barrier island in Mississippi, and authorities say within days they see no evidence of foul play. Second, his family's attorney, a nationally recognized civil rights lawyer, hires investigators and issues subpoenas to social media companies, suggesting the narrative authorities are accepting doesn't hold up. Third, the friends who were with Nolan on that island hire their own lawyers and do something unusual. They go back to the island with their legal team and start appearing on media shows. That's where it gets complicated, because an attorney representing those friends makes an on-air accusation that changes the entire character of this investigation. He claims, on record, that Nolan's family has never actually turned the phone over to authorities, despite saying they would. A phone that might hold the last images, the last messages, the last digital record of what happened that day. And if that's true, we need to talk about what it means for an investigation when the people demanding answers aren't sharing the evidence that could provide them. What actually happened to Nolan Wells? And what do the people closest to him? On all sides of this. Actually, no. Let's separate what we've documented from what people believe they know. Nolan Wells was 18 years old. He played college football. On July 4th, 2024, he went boating with friends to Horn Island, a barrier island off the coast of Mississippi. The island has no facilities, no infrastructure. People bring boats there, they anchor, they leave. On July 6th, his body was recovered. But here's where the record gets thin and where speculation started filling those gaps immediately. Authorities said early on they saw no evidence of foul play, no signs of criminal activity. Just a death they were investigating.
What a statement on the Nolan Wells case, right? Did Nolan Wells' family not turn over his phone to authorities? Now, I got to explain where this allegation is coming from because it just happened on Dan Abrams' Sirius show, and we're going to bring Dan on. But Nolan Wells, of course, is the 18-year-old college football player who died after a July 4th boating trip to this barrier island known as Horn Island out in Mississippi. His body was found on July 6th. His family is demanding answers. They are demanding a thorough and complete investigation. They have hired their own attorney, Ben Crump, to conduct an independent investigation as authorities, namely the Jackson County Sheriff's Office, conduct their own investigation. The results of the state official autopsy toxicology report, they have not been released. The case is expected to go to a grand jury under Mississippi law for potential criminal charges. Only after that could we expect to see the autopsy report, the toxicology report. But look, we don't even know for sure how Nolan died. We don't know the circumstances of his death. We don't know what caused his death.
The family said something different. They said they needed answers, real answers, thorough answers. So they brought in Ben Crump, an attorney who has represented families in high-profile cases involving young black men and deaths under contested circumstances. Now, here's what matters about that choice. Crump's presence meant this case was going to be litigated in public. It meant the family was going to push for transparency, for independent investigation, for accountability that went beyond what local law enforcement might provide on its own timeline. Crump said the family wanted their own experts to examine the evidence. They said they would cooperate. They said they wanted answers. What happened next, according to people close to the case, was less clear. Nolan's phone became the center of attention almost immediately. His mother reported that when she got the phone back, allegedly from the friends that night, she was able to track it using a Life 360 app. She claimed that the Snapchat accounts associated with Nolan had no photos or videos on them. Zero. Which raised a question: if Nolan spent an afternoon on an island with friends on a summer holiday, why would there be no images, no video, nothing visual documented? Had the phone been wiped? Had messages or media been deleted?
Previously reportedly claimed that when the family got Nolan's phone back, seemingly from his friends, that she actually tracked the phone down using a Life 360 app, she reportedly claimed that there were no pictures or videos on these Snapchat accounts that Nolan had. So it was a concern that was information deleted.
Crump's team responded to these concerns by proposing something unusual: a mutual inspection. His forensic experts and law enforcement would examine the phone simultaneously. at the same time, so there could be transparency, so everyone could see what was there or wasn't there. It sounded reasonable. It sounded like cooperation. It sounded like a way to answer the question directly. Except, and this is documented, it doesn't appear that mutual inspection ever happened. The family issued subpoenas to Snapchat, WhatsApp, TikTok, Meta, and Life 360. They subpoenaed the platforms, not law enforcement. They were reaching for server-side data, for backup data, for the material that might still exist even if the phone itself had been cleared. That's a documented legal maneuver. It suggests the family believed information was missing.
And you couple that with the report that Nolan's family had issued subpoenas to companies like Snapchat and WhatsApp and TikTok and Meta and Life 360, potentially as part of upcoming litigation. This is according to court documents that were obtained by the Sun Herald, reporting by the New York Post. Remember, they're also just conducting their own independent investigation as to what happened here. Now, Ben Crump had reportedly indicated at one point.
But here's what Dan Abrams, a legal analyst who covered this case closely, pointed out in a recent interview. There was never any public confirmation that law enforcement actually got the phone. There was never any public statement from authorities saying, yes, we've examined Nolan's phone. Here's what we found. There was a proposal, then subpoenas, then silence on what was actually recovered. On SiriusXM, in an interview that hasn't been widely circulated but has been documented, an attorney named J. Tyler Cox, who represents the Friends, said something direct. He said he was willing to bet his reputation that Ben Crump and the family have not cooperated with law enforcement. He said they have not turned the phone over. He said, on record, that the Jackson County Sheriff's Department has the phone, not the family. He said the Friends had no reason to do anything with Nolan's phone other than give it back to Christine, Nolan's mother, and her friends later that night. Then he said anything about missing text messages or Snapchats is completely false.
That they have turned in Nolan's phone. And I'm willing to bet my reputation on that. I don't think they've cooperated at all. They do not have Nolan's phone. They haven't had access to Nolan's phone. The Jackson County Sheriff's Department has it. So how can you say that there's text missing or there's photographs missing? Our boys had no reason to do anything with Nolan's phone other than give it back to Christine and her friends later that night. So anything about missing text messages or Snapchats is completely false.
That's an accusation. That's a lawyer for the other side saying, publicly, that the family is withholding evidence or, at minimum, not cooperating with authorities in the way they claimed they would. Now, here's what we need to be clear about. This is disputed. We don't have independent confirmation of exactly what happened with the phone. We don't have a public statement from the Jackson County Sheriff's Office confirming or denying that they have it, that they've examined it, or that the family withheld it. We have an accusation from one lawyer, a counter-narrative to the family's stated position of cooperation. What we actually know is this no public report has been released. No forensic report, no examination summary, no law enforcement statement saying, we've got the phone and here's what's on it. For a piece of evidence this central to understanding what happened, that silence is notable. Now, Nolan Wells was a black teenager. His friends were white. They were close. By all accounts, genuinely close. But the moment this case became public, the racial dynamics shifted how people were interpreting the evidence. Crump explicitly positioned this within a larger pattern. A pattern he's identified across Mississippi of investigations into deaths of young black men that he believes are not thorough enough, not pursued aggressively enough, not taken as seriously.
Sorry that this has become a sort of a race case. And I say, I'm so sorry because, in theory, what this is a black kid and white kids who were friends. They were really good friends, right? And suddenly the fact that they were of different races is changing people's perception of the evidence. And that is really, macro picture, that's upsetting, right? That's not where we want our society to be.
And I don't blame a family wanting all the answers and maybe not trusting law enforcement and saying they came out too quickly to say it was not foul play and wanting to have an attorney navigate it for them. And to be honest, I whether it's the video that's come out of the boat seemingly taking on water or the...
That framing changed the case. It changed how people were reading the evidence. It changed what people were looking for. And here's something worth sitting with. When a case becomes racialized, the evidence doesn't change, but the interpretation of it does. The same phone absence becomes suspicious instead of procedural. The same friends become potential suspects instead of witnesses. The same unanswered questions become accusations. The friends, for their part, did something counterintuitive. They hired lawyers. Edward Andrew Paltic and J. Tyler Cox. They went back to Horn Island with their legal team. They appeared on media shows hosted by figures like Brandon Tatum, explaining their version of events. They said they wished they'd never gone to the island. They said Nolan was their brother.
Always right.
Yeah, I mean, they basically were saying that they're not really trying to investigate this the same way the authorities are trying to investigate it. You know, from their perspective is their clients don't know what happened to him after the last time they saw him that afternoon, right? So their position is we wanted to go to Horn Island to make sure that, in particular, their new lawyer understood the landscape, just had a sense of what it's like there, so that when he's talking about this, and again, potentially filing defamation lawsuits in connection with it, that he had a...
And here's the tension. If you believe they're guilty of something serious, that strategy makes no sense. Guilty people don't litigate. Guilty people don't go on camera. Guilty people don't invite discovery, don't invite scrutiny, don't invite the legal process that could expose them. Guilty people disappear. They go silent. As their attorney pointed out on air, it would be insane to put your clients through that exposure if you knew they had something genuinely incriminating to hide.
As to put our clients out there if we thought that they had anything potentially incriminating to say. And, you know, look, you do need to look at this, I think, this case from the kind of the big picture, which is, what is the evidence? And I always say this about this case when I talk about it, which is typically in these high-profile investigations, when things are bubbling up, right, and the investigation is ongoing, what makes these cases have layers is inconsistencies, is things that don't add up about what the defendants are, what the witnesses, potential suspects are saying, right? And yet that hasn't been the case here, right? I mean,
but innocent people also hire lawyers. Innocent people who've been accused online, who've received threats, who know they're being discussed as potential suspects even though they haven't been charged with anything. That's what the documented record shows they said they were responding to. Here's the pivot. Here's where a widely believed detail about this case needs complication. Everyone's focused on the phone, but the actual mystery, the part that Dan Abrams himself flagged as the one thing that genuinely doesn't make sense in the Friends narrative, is this: no one reportedly saw Nolan in distress on an island where many people were present. Not the Friends, not other people on the water, not rescue personnel. No one. He allegedly stayed on the island while his friends left. He allegedly drowned. He allegedly was found on the island 3 days later. But no one saw him struggling. No one saw him in the water. No one witnessed an accident.
The only thing that stands out to me right now that I just can't make sense of, if this was an accident, if this was a drowning, this is an island, like you said, so many people. I don't know who law enforcement has spoken to, but no one saw him. No one saw him in distress. No, that's the part about it.
I agree.
That's the only thing I can't grasp.
I completely agree. But that also doesn't point the finger at the Friends, right?
100%.
Right? So if the Friends left the island at the time that they say they left the island, right? Look.
That's not evidence of foul play. That doesn't point to the Friends. But it does point to a gap in the narrative. How does someone drown on a populated island without anyone knowing it happened? That's a real question the documented record hasn't fully answered. Abrams himself noted that this gap is separate from suspecting the Friends. The gap exists independently of whether the Friends are guilty or innocent. It's an answer authorities haven't provided in public, and it's worth asking. What we're waiting for is the state autopsy, the toxicology report. Under Mississippi law, this case is expected to go to a grand jury, and only after that could charges be brought or the reports be released to the public. Those reports will answer some questions. Was Nolan's death caused by drowning, by trauma, by something else? Was there alcohol or drugs in his system? Was there evidence of foul play?
So, the medical examiner really is going to assess, was it a homicide or not, right? Meaning, did he die at the hands of someone else or not? And if there is no evidence that this was a homicide in a typical investigation, that would kind of be the end of it, right? Which is, it's not a homicide. No one killed him. So time to move on. I don't think that's going to happen here, in particular because of the racial angle on this. I think Ben Crump is stating that, right? Ben Crump is saying, is lumping this case in with other cases of Black late teens boys in Mississippi who he thinks the investigations have not been thorough enough. I think that this investigation is going to be as thorough as it can be. And my guess is that there's going to be.
But here's what Dan Abrams pointed out: medical examiner reports are often ambiguous. They're often interpretable different ways. A determination that Nolan's death was an accident or an accidental drowning doesn't end this case publicly. It doesn't end it in this community. It might not end it for the family. Because once a case becomes about race, about trust in institutions, about whether official narratives can be believed, the autopsy report becomes one piece of evidence, not the final word. Crump has already suggested, when discussing a secondary autopsy, that there were unexplained aspects of Nolan's remains. He raised the specter of missing parts of the body, which he suggested might indicate mishandling. Now, as Abrams noted, that's actually standard in medical examiner work. Bodies decompose. Bodies are moved. Bodies are handled multiple times. That's not conspiracy. That's biology and procedure. But once you've raised it publicly, once it's in the conversation, once people have heard it, the fact check comes too late. The belief is already there. Let's be specific about the documented record. Nolan Wells died on or around July 4th, 2024. His body was recovered on July 6th. He was with friends on Horn Island. The friends say they left the island. They say Nolan stayed. They say they called for help when he didn't come back. The call was made. Rescue personnel came. A search was conducted. A body was found. Authorities said early on they saw no evidence of foul play. A grand jury is expected to review the case. An autopsy and toxicology report have been conducted but not released. The family has hired an attorney. The friends have hired attorneys. Independent investigations are happening. Subpoenas have been issued to social media companies. Questions exist about the phone. Questions exist about what's on it, what isn't on it, where it is, and who examined it. An attorney for the friends has accused the family of not turning the phone over to authorities as promised. The family has not publicly responded to that specific accusation with documentation. Law enforcement has not publicly weighed in on whether they have the phone, whether they need it, or what they've found if they do.
I mean, I was stunned when they said it, right? I mean, when I invited them on the show, I didn't really think they were going to break news. I thought they were going to more talk about the defamation lawsuits that they were talking about, etc. But
all of this is documented, all of this is real, and almost all of it is incomplete. Here's what I want to ask you, because I think the documented record leaves this genuinely unresolved if the family's position is that authorities moved too quickly to dismiss foul play. Why would withholding the phone, if that's actually happening, strengthen their case? Wouldn't turning it over, having it analyzed, having an independent expert explain what is and isn't on it actually support their argument that authorities weren't thorough? Or does the family have concerns about what the phone will or won't show that make them want a more controlled process? I'm genuinely asking, what's your read on that gap between stated cooperation and the apparent absence of public evidence that cooperation happened? One angle you don't hear much about, the subpoenas to the platforms themselves. That's a smart legal move. That's something sophisticated counsel does when they believe device-level data is incomplete. Snapshot servers, WhatsApp servers, Meta servers, they all keep backup data that survives even if a device is wiped. The family's legal team went after that. They went after the server, side truth. That's not the move you make if you believe the device will tell the whole story. That's the move you make if you suspect the device has been emptied and you're trying to recover what was there.
because Yeah, this isn't a typical island where there's like facilities and stuff. It's just like people go there, they go boating there, they bring their boats there, and then they leave, right? And so, they wanted to look at, where the rip currents could be and just, as they said, not to draw conclusions, but just so, they can be educated, in particular their new lawyer, because Tyler Cox had already been there, in discussing the case.
I have to say, and I may
But here's the thing, we don't know what those platforms found. We don't know if they've responded to the subpoenas. We don't know if the data is actually recoverable. That's a whole separate investigation that's happening completely out of public view. It's documented. It's happening. It's just not visible. What we're waiting for is the grand jury decision. What we're waiting for is the autopsy report. What we're waiting for is either charges or closure or continued questions. And between now and then, the case is going to live in this space where competing narratives are fighting for dominance, where people believe different things based on where they're looking, who they trust, and what they're most afraid of. The documented record doesn't resolve this yet. So we sit with it, we watch it. We keep asking for the evidence, for transparency, for the real answers that only an actual investigation can provide. And we remember, the absence of answered questions isn't the same thing as an answered question, and the absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. Nolan Wells is still dead. How he died and why and what happened on that island. That's still the actual story. Everything else is noise until the evidence speaks.
Holes, unless they've got some evidence behind them, right? I mean, I'm game to go down any rabbit hole where you show me evidence. But when you say to me, oh, because there have been two medical examiners who've examined the body. Oh, well, in between the time of the first medical examiner and the second medical examiner, there were parts of the body that appeared maybe were missing. And that's what happens, right, with medical examiners. And what I'm afraid of is that that's going to just turn into conspiracy theories that are not evidence, that are not facts. And I think it's really, really important, and I think you've been doing a really good job of this, is that we always sort of bring it back to that. We bring it back to, whoa, let's not go off on crazy rabbit holes unless we got some facts or evidence behind it.
And that's why I think when Ben Crump held that press conference about the autopsy, it would have been great if a medical examiner actually gave that report as opposed to Ben Crump, even though he tried to temper it, about missing body parts. I heard a gasp in the audience, but like you said, that's usually standard. But listen, as Dan Abrams always said,
for the second medical
the second autopsy,
yeah,
right. Yeah. And as Dan Abrams always says, when he concludes,
the grand jury will convene. The autopsy will be released. And then we'll know whether this case moves toward closure or toward more questions. Watch for that next update. We'll be covering it when it breaks. Let me know in the comments what you think actually happened out there.